Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Good evening, afternoon, or morning, and welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth. No monologue today. Just going to go right into our time with our guest. Tom Harley Campbell is the author of the John Burke Mystery Series. Satan's Choir and Blue Book are the names of his current titles. He was born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. He has been a journalist, a carpenter, a cabinet maker, a machinist, and for many years, a musician and Nashville songwriter. He lives actually very close to where I live, in a beautiful little upstate town called Trumansburg, New York. And Tom and I met some months ago when his first book came to my attention, a book called Satan's Choir. A great deal of my reading revolves around the subject of UFOs, but I've been an avid reader for just enjoying myself with the world of books since I was a kid. And I have a particular soft spot for good mystery novels, espionage, police stories, etc. And I read his first book and was really quite knocked out by it. The second one, which has this background theme having to do with UFOs, particularly appealed to me. And I thought we really haven't had a novelist on this show who has written about the subject of UFOs, even if as a backstory, since we started. So that said, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hi, Peter.
Good to see you, Harley. It was great to see you and Annie yesterday at the book launch party in Trumansburg, and to know that you sold a record amount of books. I expect all of those people are home right now reading it as they should be.
I hope they're halfway finished with it already by now.
And then on to the next one. When we met and started to chat, a number of things really intrigued me about you. First, I know very few people who have grown up in the Dayton, Ohio area with the whole UFO story resounding as part of the community reality, myth, legend, etc. Tell me a little about your family and about your childhood.
Well, I was pretty much, I was born in Dayton on my grandmother's farm, or I was living in my family lived in East Dayton. That's where I was born. And I lived on my grandmother's farm out in the country outside of Dayton. And then we bought a house. They bought their first house, my parents, in this little brand new development. At that point, the easternmost development in Dayton, as the suburbs were booming back in the early 50s. Mm-hmm. And this just happened to be less than a mile and a half from a mile to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, another half mile into Area B, which is where Project Blue Book was headquartered and where Hangar 18 was and all that. So I could almost see it from my upstairs window, but it was very, very, very near.
How old were you when your family moved to Dayton?
Well, that's where we were always from. So I was born there. And we moved to this house when I was about 5 or 6.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us a little about your parents.
My dad was a salesman, a delivery man, served in World War II in the Navy, Came back, went to school at the University of Dayton on the GI Bill for a short time, but then started a family and had to go to work. So that sort of ended for him. And my mother raised 5 kids. And once we were all gone, she sort of went out into the world and ended up actually working at the University of Dayton as in the development office. Yeah.
One of the things that kept me turning the pages in both books was, as a writer, as a fiction writer, which is something I've never done willingly. I am always impressed by character development, and whatever the story is, if the author has developed the characters sufficiently enough and in a way that you can relate to, how they almost become real people in your life that you are rooting for, concerned with. It's very childlike, and it's something I think we strive for in our work, to get readers, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, to just lay down all of their considerations and follow the story and hopefully enjoy it. The John Burke character, who in your first book, Satan's Choir, is a soon-to-retire head of homicide for the Dayton Police, and in the second one comes out of retirement to follow up this extraordinary lead on a cold case that takes us into the narrative. Who is John Burke? Where did he come from? How did you put the pieces together to make this very fully formed, humanly imperfect, thoughtful, decent, hardworking cop?
Well, I think he is a combination of a lot of people in my life, including parts of him are me. Many parts of him are my father. I think that's probably, the most of him is there. And but I wanted him. I read a lot of crime novels, and I wanted this guy John Burke to be a nice man, and not too damaged. So I thought about my dad a lot when I read the book, or when I wrote the book. And in fact, the first book was dedicated to my wife and to my parents, and he died about 11 years ago. Yesterday, I don't know if I told you this when we were at the book launch yesterday. Yesterday would have been his 100th birthday. And so I had his Navy hat there with me at the table at the book signing. And so he was on my mind all day yesterday. And so still missing. Yep.
I can imagine. The family, his wife, who is also a very fully formed person. You know who this person is by the end of the book. It's wonderful that you take the time to make her as real and as live as you do. Also, the son, who is a homicide detective, and we know will be taking over the unit once the father retires. Also, the same things, composite people, or were they inspired by specific people?
I think composite people, brothers, sisters, brothers' wives, sisters' husbands, just whatever I could grab out of the things that I knew. As they say, you write about what you know. So that's where they are.
When growing up in this legendary area, do you remember first as a child hearing about the subject of flying saucers or UFOs?
Well, it seemed like it was always there. There were a lot of, it was in the news constantly around Dayton, Ohio, sightings all the time. And there, one of the problems with that is there were so many, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was a huge Air Force base, very, arguably one of the most important in the country. And a lot of research going on there, a lot of experimental space or aircraft in the air all the time. And I think that fostered that, because whether you were seeing a UFO or some bizarre new, piece of equipment flying through the air that no one had ever seen or heard of, that was there. During the Cold War, which was those years that I was growing up, there was a SAC base. The end of the runway was 7 miles from our house, and there were B-52 bombers loaded with atomic bombs, flying in and out of there every 12 hours. Four would take off, and they would be followed by 4 KC-135 tanker planes to keep them fueled as they were in the air. And they basically just flew around in the air in case the Soviet Union struck us. We would have they wouldn't get these guys. They would be in the air and they would be able to fly and retaliate. And they took off over our house, like I said, at least twice a day, I think it was. And the whole house would shake and rumble and dishes would clatter. And so that's what I grew up with. The Air Force Base. It was there. Yeah. Oh, I can't hear Peter.
For a lot of us contemporaries who grew up at about the same time, the Cold War manifested itself in different ways. Some families actually, had fallout shelters constructed, but as school kids, especially elementary school, that's where I remember it focused. The drills stopped in junior high school for whatever reason. I guess they knew that standing with your arms covering the back of your neck would not save you from a nuclear blast. But I don't actually know anybody who, as part of their childhood, had these planes, the B-52s, coming and going from their fail-safe points on a regular basis. And as a kid, you knew that these planes all had nuclear ordnance on them?
Oh, yeah. And we were aware, and it was always a joke or a fear or whatever, however you wanted to treat it, that, we would always say, well, if the Soviet Union strikes us, we're going to be one of their first targets. The Wright-Patterson Air Force Base will be one of the targets. And so we would always sort of brag about that, oh yeah, we're going to be the first to go.
We're number one.
Yeah. And there was I forget which book, it's in one of the books. I talk about the boys when they were young boys were talking about how duck and cover, which were the drills that we had to do in school and in grade school, get down on your knees under the desk and duck and cover. And we were talking about it in front of the father of one of my young friends who was an Air Force officer. And he looked at us and just laughed and said, you kids, he said, look, if this happens, just bend over, put your head between your legs and kiss your ass
goodbye.
So we finally got over all that too.
One of the most poignant aspects of this book does not actually enter into the story, but was obviously a very memorable part of your life. As an elementary school kid through high school, you had among your good friends a boy named Carl. You dedicate the book to him. Carl has passed.
Carl died a few years ago. And you want me to talk about Carl a little bit?
I do.
Okay. Well, Carl was Carl Quintanilla, and his father, Hector Quintanilla, who was then a major, was the last head of Project Blue Book.
Yeah.
Before they shut it down in 1969, early 1969, I think, or I forget, but around them.
Yeah.
But they had come to the area, to the base, and Carl and his family lived in base. We called it base housing. It wasn't on the base; it was just off the base, but it was provided by the base. A whole giant apartment complex, and very, very near to where I grew up. Between me and where I lived in the base, so a 10-minute walk, and so they came when I was in around the 6th or 7th grade, I think, is when his father took over that program. And then through my junior year of high school, and Carl and I were good buddies and hung with the same bunch of kids for all of that time. And I tried to get in touch with Carl. He left after our junior year, and we sort of lost touch. And I tried to get in touch with him in the last few years before he died a couple of years ago to tell him about the book that I was writing. And I knew he was somewhat involved in the whole UFO thing. And I think he had helped get his father's memoir published online. And but I never got a hold of Carl. A lot of dead ends with phone numbers and addresses. And I think he became a bit of a loner toward the end of his life. And so I'm very sad about that. And I wish I could have talked to him. I am in touch with his sister, with one of his sisters who still lives in West Ohio. And she's reading the book. And we email back and forth.
Do you remember the first time that you and Carl spoke about what his father did?
I don't. We all knew that that's what his father did, but I don't think we paid a whole lot of attention to it as a kid. I've talked about it's. I think I've talked to you. Somebody's maybe written about this, or I've posted some stuff about it. But when I was a junior in high school, I was in a journalism class, and we had part of an assignment was to interview somebody. Could have been your father, your mother, your sister, your aunt. Could be somebody famous. If you could find somebody famous, that would be even better. And I asked Carl. I said, "Hey, do you think your dad would sit down and interview him about Project Blue Book?" And he asked him, and Major Quintanilla agreed to do it. And so I interviewed him, and that was the most Carl and I probably ever talked about UFOs. And I don't really know how he felt about it. But reading things later, I knew it was quite an issue with a lot of people, and maybe even within the family. I don't know. But
did you, in growing up in Dayton, ever have your own UFO sighting?
I did. Once there, and then there has been one here near the Ithaca area since then. But back then, I was living in a small town called Spring Valley, which was south and west of Dayton. Very small little town. Little main street, some shops, grocery store. And I was renting a house with a couple of buddies right on the main street. And my father was there, and one of my buddies, Rick, that I was living with at the time, and we had just been mushroom hunting. We had gone out the railroad tracks that led out of town, that crossed through town, and we were hunting for morel mushrooms in the spring. And we had just gotten back, and we were standing up in the middle of the road, or at the side of the road, right in front of our house that we were living in, just chatting, and the three of us. And all of a sudden, something caught all three of us. The corner of our eye. We all looked up, and it happened so fast. Probably in about 3 seconds, something flew in an arc from the eastern horizon to the western horizon and disappeared. That, and in 3 seconds, I would say, it's about how long it took. And we all saw it, and there was no noise, and we had no idea what it was. It was an unidentified flying object, and we were all just sort of stunned, and we couldn't even really say, well, what was, we couldn't decide on the shape but it was silvery, and it was there, and then it was gone. Yeah. And there were, like I said, there were a lot of sightings like that around Dayton because of experimental aircraft. But so I'm not hearing you again, Peter.
Which it may have been, of course, an experimental aircraft, but maybe not.
Well, certainly nothing that moved that fast that anybody knew of at that point.
Okay. Out of curiosity, do you remember ever talking about it with these guys again?
I can't remember. I remember talking to my parents about, or my dad was there. He saw it, and we discussed it, and my friend Rick, and I remember combing through the newspapers the next day to see if there were any other reports like what we had seen. And I don't recall really. I don't think we saw anything in the paper. But I told people, and they would just look at you. Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. So
classic.
Very skeptical.
And you had a sighting in the greater Ithaca area here some time back?
Yeah, that was in the early to mid 80s. And I actually have a friend here now who we've talked about this, but it was around the time when the Hudson River, there's sort of a group of sightings that happened down in the Hudson River Valley back at that same time that I think anybody that's pays much attention to UFOs knows about that period.
82, 83.
Yeah, somewhere around there. And that was around this time. And it was just over the lake. We were at a party in the summertime along the lake, and over the lake were these red lights moving in strange patterns and directions, completely silent for a long time. And a lot of people watching this, and there was stuff in the local paper the next day about that. Nobody knew what it was, but now I have a friend here who is a pilot, and flew airplanes and jets privately after being in the service, and he claims that a friend of his told him, who is also a pilot down in the Hudson Valley, and he says it was a hoax. A bunch of private pilots like himself in small airplanes, small fixed wing airplanes, got together and flew up at night and had the lights and would fly and shut their engines off or coast or whatever and create this thing. And he said this person told him that they came up and they did it over Ithaca one night. Which apparently is what I saw, if it's true, but it was dead silent, and I don't know how that could be. He said, well, a pilot doesn't, and a small airplane doesn't make much noise, but it just seems like it has to make some noise.
It makes noise. At the same time, if what you saw the lighting sequence, if that pilot was suggesting that these craft were flying like wingtip to wingtip without much movement, it's the same, I think, debunked argument as the Phoenix sightings, and saying that this was a bunch of, private planes, etc.
Right.
As time passed, did you keep an interest up in UFOs, or it kind of resurged when you decided to write a book with part of the backstory relating to the subject?
Well, I've always been intrigued by it, and would look at things online, and just because of my connection to the Quintanella's and to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And
Right.
I always was interested in it. And when I came up with the idea for the second book, I got further into it, and so the second book, two of the main characters in the book, I based on Carl Quintanilla and his father, Major Hector Quintanilla. I believe he was a lieutenant colonel when he retired, but at that time he was a major when he was running Project Blue Book. And I changed them.
Let's go. Let's take a moment to go back.
Something's happening. I'm not hearing you.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I missed that. Yeah.
Let's take a moment and go back to your meeting with Major Quintanilla. You're a high school kid. You have an assignment. You have a friend who has a father who is, distinguished in this area. I'm sure when Carl mentioned to his dad that, his friend Harley wanted to interview him, we can only imagine it was like, well, all right. And I'll tell you, what I would say to anybody, the usual explaining it away and taking, the company position, so to say. But there was more to your interview with him than that. Tell us a little about the interview and then what he said off the record.
Yeah, well, that was exactly how it sort of played out. I remember him smiling and thinking probably, well, I have to do a lot of interviews. Gee, I've never done one for a kid this young and a high school kid. And I think he was slightly amused at the whole prospect of it. But I asked him a lot of questions about Blue Book, and as you said, he told me the same thing, that he fed the press and whoever else he had to talk to about it, and debunked a lot of things, and I busily was writing down notes, and then when we finished, I asked him, I said, Major Quintanilla, off the record, I'm not going to write this down, I'm not going to say anything about it. I would like to know what you really personally think about UFOs and whether they exist.
Bravo.
And he said, Tom, back then I was known as Tom mostly. He said, Tom, this is a vast, vast universe. And I think it would be extremely arrogant of us to think that we are the only intelligent life in this vast universe.
Good for him, and good for you for asking that question.
Yeah, I've always carried that with me, and I believe it. He believed it, and I believe it.
In my world of being so in contact with so many people who are dedicating a good part of their lives to addressing this compelling mystery, I don't think I know anyone who ever met with Major Quintanilla. So way to go.
Well, it was just a lucky thing.
I want to show our viewers the cover to your book. I think it's extremely powerful. And in the interest of full honest disclosure, an alien skull does not actually enter into the story. It is the book cover. But what does enter into the story is more than enough. You do something.
There is a mention in the book when they're talking, when the professor and John Burke are talking, and he's telling him about what he has really found out from the from these notes that were out there, that
right.
There were a lot of not just bodies found at
Roswell.
Roswell, but other crash sites, and that other remains had been found throughout. Skeletal remains that were older than people knew where they came from or whatever. So it does mention a skeletal remain of a UFO.
Fair enough. And I think it's a wonderful cover. You take as your plot point not some obvious major aspect of the cover-up, but you do something that intrigued me, and in part was one of the things that held my attention straight through. And no spoilers here. This is all material that we put forward in promotional blurbs and things. But your main character stumbles into, well, a young man comes to him with a clue, a compelling clue to a haunting cold case. And it's the murder of a man going back many years. And as John Burke begins to investigate the murders, the bodies start to pile up. And it is all in the service of literally keeping that secret from 1947 intact. I think some people, when they read it, may think, well, this is very colorful and the government wouldn't kill people to keep secrets. Well, I would have to disagree with that. And you make it very real. How? Because in both stories, in both books, we enter the Dayton Police Department, the homicide division. Do you know cops? Is this all research? Was some of it imagination? In both books, you make those squads come alive, and investigative procedures as well. And cop talk that sounded very natural to me. How did you research that part of the book?
Well, first of all, I have a daughter who was a cop for a long time, so she helped me out. And then I actually contacted the Dayton Police Department, a very nice woman there that worked in the, I don't know if she would be considered a secretary or whatever, but she was involved with the homicide department. And she answered a lot of questions for me. And then I actually went, when I was writing the first book, I went and she gave me a tour of the homicide department. And I met a couple of the cops. A couple of them, their kids were going to the same high school that I went to. And so that was pretty much how I did it. And then, it's fiction, as you pointed out. So I made up what I had to make up and tried to make it as realistic as possible. And then on the second book, that a very strange thing happened. After I wrote the first book, several months after it was published, I found out about a cop in Dayton, Ohio, who was retired, who had been the head of the homicide department for 22 years, whose last name was also Burke.
Oh, no.
Total coincidence. This is a man named Doyle Burke. He's actually got his own book out, published this in the last year. He published his own book called Death as a Living, which is about his life as a homicide detective.
Wow.
Great title. So I found out about him. It was just a complete coincidence that I named my cop Burke. His name is Doyle Burke, and we got to know each other a little bit, and so on the second book, I ran some things past him, and I remember after he read the first book, I said, "How'd I do?" As far as I wanted to know how I did as far as the cop stuff went, and he said, "Oh, it's great. You did really well in a TV cop kind of a way."
That's sort of a mixed message, but
but that's pretty much where I got my a lot of my cop stuff was from cop shows on TV.
And there are some great ones. That's actually terrific.
Yeah, Doyle's been a big help, and I think he's a fan of the books now too.
Another Burke.
The real John Burke is what I call him.
Yeah. When you were growing up, and at that point in your life when you began to really master reading and were free to basically read what you chose, what kind of books first captured your imagination?
Well, I went through 12 years of Catholic education.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were encouraged to, read the classics, develop an appreciation for the good books, for literature.
Yes.
And that's what I read a lot of. And even after, getting through all that, and I read, mostly novels and short stories that were, literary.
Good.
Considered literary.
Yeah.
I didn't read a lot of crime fiction, and I didn't read a lot of nonfiction. And I always thought I wanted to be a writer. I took some journalism classes, like I said, in high school, and I even went to college hoping to be a journalism major before I dropped out. And then I wrote off and on short stories for pretty much all my life. Not very many, a few here and a few there. Never got very serious about it. And then the idea for the first book came along, and that really wasn't even going to be a crime book. But once I started working on it, I realized this has to be a crime novel with a cop in it. And so that's how that happened. It wasn't originally going to be that. But
do you remember when you first were turned on by, were taken by a mystery novel or a good police detective story?
Well, I think my brother and his wife were reading the Henning Mankell books. He's a Swedish crime writer. A few years ago, and his main character in this whole series of books that he did was Kurt Wallander, a cop named Kurt Wallander, a Swedish cop. And he wrote, I read all the books. There were like 10, 12 of them maybe. And I read all of those. And that's really where I got into it. And
Got it.
He was a good writer. And I loved the character. And, those shows were made into, I think the BBC, I think they were made into a Swedish television series as well as a BBC series. Yeah. And those were good books.
And Wallander's work has been extensively translated now and very popular in a lot of countries. That genre of Scandinavian mystery and murder writers, they are in a class by themselves to a degree.
There's a bunch of them now too. So,
which brings me to another question, which is, when I was first introduced to you as a writer, it was in your first novel, Satan's Choir. And it has nothing to do, of course, with UFOs, but in some ways, I thought it was a more challenging, gutsy, problematic, difficult, complex subject approach, and to do it as even-handedly as possible, especially because it is a dark, sad story. It's been in the news for years. And I think also being Catholic, it was a particular challenge. It has to do with sexual abuse within the church. And once again, a murder mystery going back in time, revolving around that. How did you get to the point where you said, I'm going to take this on? Because you do it in a way that at no point did I feel you were being unfair or inappropriate or making excuses or creating blame where there was none. It's a very human story and a very powerful one, and it stresses out our characters to the max, John Burke included. How did you decide to make this the subject of your first novel?
Well, that was, again, as I said, I didn't plan it to be a police procedural or a mystery like that. Well, it was going to be a mystery. That was the idea. It was going to be a mystery. And the idea was going to be where these young boys, 7th, 8th graders, who are abused, were going to somehow get back at this priest who was abusing them.
Yeah.
And I thought a lot about the Stand By Me.
Yes.
Remember that movie?
Yes.
Where all the boys, they find the body and they go through this whole they sort of grow up from what has happened to them with this whole situation. And that's sort of the feeling that I sort of originally had in mind for that book. And then, as I said, as I started writing it, I realized, well, this is a crime. This is going to be a crime novel.
Yeah.
And I developed Burke, and then he ended up being far more involved in the whole thing than anybody knew. So,
Harley, how can I say, to walk that line between being irate, absolutely as angry as anybody can be about these kind of abuses, the matrix that you set it up within, again, these young guys who get caught up in this in the most tragic kind of way. I did think about that wonderful movie, and I thought, not that in any way it's derivative of or, taking anything from it, but that camaraderie, and in this sense, the damage done, and how Burke kind of follows up on it, and then, has to look inside himself as well. Again, it has nothing to do with UFOs. If you're like me and you're very involved in the subject, but you do read other books on other subjects, I really feel that, again, if you're into this kind of fiction, or if you're not and you'd like to try it out, these are two marvelous books to do it with. At this point right now, your newest book is not only just out. I had the pleasure of attending the book launch party yesterday, and it was wonderful to see such a great turnout. Is your mind already starting to plot a third novel, or on hold for the moment while you recover from the second?
Yeah, I mean, I published these two pretty quickly together. They were written a while ago. It just took me a long time to finally get them published. And I think I know the main problems I had getting the first one published were because of the subject matter of the book. I was told outright by several agents, I can't get this published just because of the subject matter.
Yeah. And
several were told by publishers right out, nope, no way we're going to touch it.
Wow.
So I went ahead and wrote the second book, finally got them both published, self-published, more or less, and have had an idea for a third one that's been bouncing around for quite a while. It's changing here and there, but I think I will write a third book with John Burke. As you pointed out, he was retired at the end of the first book, so he's not a young man. I don't know how many books Burke can stand himself.
Well, please don't let him go quite yet. Also, in my writing career, I've, written with the passion of the things that I believe in, but also taken jobs where you're writing to pay the bills. Back in the day, when I began to do some commercial work right at the end of the video era, I had a job writing box copy where you have an opportunity, well, you have a mandate of, say, 150 words that will tell a potential buyer everything that they want to know, that you want them to know about this terrific movie or documentary, making it come alive, the specifics on it. And it's a very challenging job to reduce everything you think you want to say into a very small amount of words. My sister Helen was a wonderful writer, and as a gold and platinum record award-winning lyricist and a great poet, I became incredibly respectful of the challenge of reductive writing, of writing in a small space with a big thought. And music lyrics are that. You are a songwriter. You've had songs published, performed. They're out there. In fact, when people visit your website, and I'll give them the link before we leave the air,
Oh, good.
They can hear some. And I encourage everybody to visit it. How did you get into songwriting, and how would you compare the challenge of writing a lyric for a song with, say, a chapter in a book?
Oh boy, that's kind of tough. The songwriting, that in itself was so different each time. Some songs would just pop out. The very first song that I wrote, a lot of people consider it the best song that I ever wrote. And that came pretty quickly. There were other songs that were struggled with. I wrote a lot of songs with a songwriting partner, a guy named David Kent down in Nashville. We wrote a lot of songs, and those were, a two-way operation. And but as far as sitting down and writing a book compared to that, you knew that it was going to be a long process. You're going to write a book, it's going to take a while. When you sit down to write a song, you want to get the song done. You don't want to spend 6 months, a year working on a song. You get it down and you work on it quickly, and you try to get somebody to cut the song. And so it's pretty different. And I enjoyed writing songs, but I think I enjoy writing fiction more. The pace is better for me.
As a novelist, we all draw from our backgrounds and things around us to create the worlds that we do. You, like me, have worked have had multiple careers. You've worked as a cabinet maker, a carpenter, a journalist, of course, a machinist, and a working musician. Did any of that background in your life seep into anything in either of your novels in terms of informing a character or filling out something that from your own experience?
Well, I don't think a whole lot of it did. Burke certainly, as you find out eventually in the first book and some more, he loved music. He in the first book he can't stand to be, he doesn't want to hear any music, and that's one of his issues. But that gets resolved, and you realize that he's always loved music, and he likes to sing, and so that part of it was, went into Burke. And that, like I said, that was my dad too. My dad was a really good musician, and had a beautiful voice, and just loved music. So
it also underscores the poignancy of what John Burke, the character, is struggling with internally, and how pulled he is. Ultimately, he does something a lot of characters often don't, which is face these issues that have affected his personality in ways that have hurt his marriage, made him not a happy person. And it's hardly what I would call, a very happy, fairy tale kind of ending. But there's wonderful resolve in the first book that brings us into the second. Also, I thought you had an extra challenge. You're now an author of an unrelated book, and you wanted to make a standalone book that you could read without having read the first book. And you make references very discreetly at certain points to the first book, but never in a way that goes off balance or gives things too much away, just enough, I would hope, that people will, after they finish Blue Book, want to read Satan's Choir. Was that in your thinking, to engineer that kind of in a way?
Well, actually, I have to thank my brother and his wife, another brother, my brother Harry and his wife Nancy. They read the what I thought was going to be the last draft of the second book, and they point, because in the spots where it's referenced back to Burke's first story, to the first book, and to his issues, they thought that I overdid those, and gave away too much about the first book, and made it seem like, oh, I need to read that first book first, just what you were saying. And so I didn't remove. I took a few of those out, but the other ones I just slimmed them down and made them quick references to these issues, so that you didn't really dwell on it. You would know something has happened in the past, but you move right along with the second book. So it is a standalone book. Definitely can be.
Yes.
I do hope people would want to go back and read the first one, though.
I would too. And if I hadn't read them in the order that I did, and you had just approached me with the new manuscript, there's no question in my mind I would have gone back and read the first book for a number of reasons, the most important of which is I enjoyed reading the second book so much and enjoyed the first book, as the proper introduction. On the back of the book, a number of blurbs from different writers, and I'm proud to be among them. And I just want to read most of what I've written, and every word absolutely deserved. At last, a solid, well-written, and deeply driving detective novel willing to take on a subject that many writers understandably shy away from. In the summer of 1947, the Truman administration set in motion an all-too-real cover-up regarding the subject of UFOs, the lengths to which the dark operatives involved in keeping this secret will go to include murder, in the past as well as the present day. John Burke is a thinking person's retired detective turned private investigator, and he is in a race to understand the above top secret world he has unintentionally been drawn into, while simultaneously doing all possible to head off more officially sanctioned murders. This particularly likable, well-drawn characters and fast-paced plot engaged me from start to finish. And that's a fact. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and wonderful to be close enough, unlike so many of my friends, that we actually can get to see each other fairly regularly. I want people to know that they can learn more about you, see more on your life, what you do, if they go to TomHarleyCampbell.com.
That's it.
TomHarleyCampbell.com. Any closing thoughts that you want to share with our audience, or?
One thing that we touched on, but then we got away from, and that I wanted to just point out to people about the second book, that so in talking about Carl Quintanilla and his father, the director of Project Blue Book. They've been fictionalized in this book. They are two of the main characters in the book, but I've changed them from Mexican Americans, and in the book they are now African Americans. So I just wanted to point that out, that those two people have become part of the book.
Yeah, and very poignant characters they are. Harley, thank you so much for being on the show. We are going to take a 4-minute break, and then we are going to return with my second guest of the evening, me. See you on the other side.
Bye, Peter. Thanks.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
And welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, your host, Peter Robbins. If you're enjoying this show and other shows on KGRA, consider subscribing. All you need to do is go to their website, kgradb.com. That's KGRA for digitalbroadcasting.com. Go to the subscription area, and if you use my first name, Peter, as your subscription code, whether you subscribe for a month or a year, you will get a full 30% off. So, about a month ago, I did something that I haven't done on this show, which was invite myself to be the guest for 2 hours and told some stories. I was not sure how it would go because 2 hours is a lot of time. And even if you have good stories and you're pretty good at telling them, people can go to sleep, nod off, drift. And so I pulled together some stories I thought would hold you guys. And I was very moved by how many people responded so positively. So much so that irregularly, we're going to come back to that format. And I'm going to share some stories with you about this, that, and the other thing. Tonight, I wanted to start with the idea that for all of us, wherever we live, whatever we do, however routine it may seem to us and the people around us, it has the potential of being very exotic to someone else, just by virtue of where we grow up, or what the terrain is, or our histories, or anything that is completely alien to someone else is of genuine intrigue potentially because it's so different. And I thought back in my life to a time when that point was really brought home to me, so much so that it's always stayed in the back of my thoughts. And we'll go back for a little bit to a time when I was traveling in Nepal, a very exciting time in my life, and a really wonderful adventure. I had come into the country through a border station in India. And I think it was about a 6 or 8 hour bus ride from that point in the lowlands where India borders Nepal to Kathmandu, which is, I think, about the same altitude, maybe a little less than Denver, 8,000 some odd feet up. And it was along one of those roads that you occasionally see in a Facebook meme where a bus is on a road that is exactly 1 inch larger than it needs to be, with a drop of like 8,000 feet straight down. Not 8,000, but that was a bus ride I took, and realized after I had, many weeks later when I was ready to leave Nepal, that I would rather fly out in a small plane during a monsoon than take that bus ride again. But I quickly linked up with a number of other young Americans on the road, and 3 stay in my mind. Nick was a Texan, the first person I ever knew who kept his head shaved, grew up in Waco, and he was traveling with his girlfriend, Elizabeth, who was a Kennedy, I think second or third cousins of those Kennedys, as she described herself very cheerfully, a black sheep in the family. And Larry. Larry lived in Southern California, and they had been traveling together for some time and ultimately just decided, rent a place, spend some months here. I think they had been there about half a year. And once we got to know each other, they said, when we first got here, we climbed a small mountain and camped out on it. Small, in that Tibetans don't have words for mountains that begin below about 15,000 feet. They're all foothills. And the Kathmandu Valley is surrounded by a ring of mountains, and the tallest is a mountain called Shivapuri. And I think we had a several thousand foot climb to get to the peak. We woke at dawn, took public transportation as far as it would go, started to hike, and by about noon, I was hanging onto a rock face with a heavy pack, with the sun beating down on me, thinking, this is nuts. I could fall and die. Why did I do this? Well, I did it because it was an adventure and it sounded great. We had to, of course, take all the food that we needed for that trip. most of it was dehydrated. And then once we arrived on the mountain top, or very just below the summit, we stayed where they had stayed. It was this beautiful little retreat, a Buddhist retreat. Maybe it was built 500 years ago. And it was quite exquisite with a few simple buildings, and didn't see anybody for the 4 days or so we were up there. We all brought a couple of books, some recreational marijuana or hashish, lots of food. We knew there was a water source up there. Main job was collecting wood and then drying it out by the fire because the moisture level was just so intense. This was the early 1970s, and all of us carried paperbacks with us. You'd often trade books at hotels, leave them on a shelf, take other books. But we were all readers on the road. And there was a relatively new novel out set in an area that I knew, that had come out before I left the States, had become a bestseller. And I thought, well, I'll take that. And it's a novel by a writer named Mario Puzo called The Godfather. And growing up in New York City, and knowing Little Italy fairly well, I was coming upon locations that were very familiar to me. And at meals and things, we would all get together and, among other things, talk about how we were enjoying our books or not. They had all read The Godfather and were increasingly intrigued that I knew or had eaten at or was familiar with areas that entered into the book. And so much so that it began to dawn on me that coming from North Carolina and Texas and California, these were truly exotic locations. It culminated when I had just finished the part where Sonny, the soon-to-be deceased oldest brother and the hothead, had been multiply machine-gunned to death at the Jones Beach toll booth. Now, if you grew up on Long Island, New York, like I did, Jones Beach was, for many of us, a very real part of summer weekends. And although for the film version, they built a toll booth, period, to the thing, I remember regularly coming and going through that toll booth, and I told them all. And they looked at me in awe. I'm trying to characterize this as straightforward as I can. And as if by one said, you have been to the toll booths where they shot Sonny? And I thought to myself, remember this moment, because this is not exotic to you, but it is to them. In the world of paranormal studies, we come upon individuals, regular individuals having irregular experiences, normal people having what we'll characterize as abnormal experiences, to the extreme. I am not somebody who has had many paranormal experiences in my life worthy of singling out compared to so many people who I have met, spent time with, assisted in some ways in researching their situations. But I've had a few, and they've been memorable. And I wanted to share one of them with you tonight, with the understanding that although this happened more than 40 years ago, I still don't understand it. I'm fine with it, but it remains an abiding mystery in my life. We all have them. And maybe just a gentle tap on the shoulder sometimes that there is so much more to what we'll lovingly call reality than often trips along in front of our, conscious eyes and ears and senses. So let me set the scene for you. I had graduated from art school, joined the Merchant Marine, traveled around the world for a year on my own, returned home, connected with some of my art school buddies, went in on a big commercial loft that we shared for several years. After 2 years, the rent went up and we were all out. This was at such a different time in the world, in our lives, in the history of New York City. There's a district in Lower Manhattan called Soho. It's an acronym for South of Canal Street. It's 10 square blocks. It's a historic landmark designated area. It contains the largest concentration of what we call cast iron facade buildings in the world. Cast iron buildings came out of Civil War technology, and they allowed factories to literally cast and manufacture components for the fronts of buildings that could be bolted into place literally and give a facade of a simple white or a simple configuration, or Greek in terms of the columns and the details. They were a huge breakthrough in construction, and many of them became the homes of small factories and a great deal of manufacturing in Lower Manhattan, starting in probably the 1860s or so, and the earliest ones that still survive are around. I was teaching painting one night a week at my alma mater, the School of Visual Arts, in the School of Continuing Education, which I loved. I was not quite yet teaching first, second, third grade art at the terrific St. Anne's School in Brooklyn Heights. That would come in a year or two. But my main income then, like a lot of young artists, was in some aspect of construction. The fact is that Soho, if you visit New York, is now a very manicured, upscale, alternate neighborhood characterized by extraordinarily grand interiors, lofts that may be 25, sometimes 3,500 square feet, the size of a large house, that people, in many cases, were fortunate enough to pick up when they were modestly priced, renovate the hell out of them, and these things have appreciated markedly. For years, I worked as part of different building crews in going into these spaces, most of which were abandoned factory spaces, and gutting them, and then, in my case, doing wallboard and framing carpentry, and working around the flooring people, the electric guys, the plumbers, the floor finishers, the people that ultimately spray painted the hell out of everything. I really loved my life. I was following my dream. I was a young artist. I had my own loft in East Chinatown with a great view of the Trade Center and the Manhattan Bridge. I thought of myself as a kind of a blue-collar intellectual. I was very much a part of the art scene downtown, and I thought I was well-read. Free time was spent often, in, I was going to say the bars, but Soho, until the building boom started in 1971 or so, a little earlier, maybe late 60s, had one drinking establishment in 10 square blocks. It had been there since 1908 or something. And in 1971, the first tavern, bar, since the turn of the century opened. Again, this was not a residential area when it was built. It was anything but. And it was called Ken and John's Broome Street Bar. Some years later, Ken bought John out, but to the best of my knowledge, if you're on West Broadway, at the southeast corner of Broome Street and West Broadway is Ken's Broome Street Bar. I had finished up day's work on whatever loft I was working on, and rather than head east and head home to my loft in Chinatown, I decided to have a beer at the bar. And I'm walking. If you are a New Yorker, these places will hopefully evoke pictures. If you're not, it doesn't matter. I'm walking west on Broome Street and about 2 blocks from the bar on the same side of the street, so I can't see it, but I can't miss the fact that a very large limousine is pulling away, and it's gone. A few short minutes later, I walk into the bar, and the atmosphere is absolutely electric. There is a buzz in the place that was almost was electric, and I picked up very quickly on what was causing it. Again, this is the mid-'70s. It's a different period of time, popular culture. Mick Jagger himself, yes, that is right, had been in the bar, had a drink with a friend or two, and left. And if you were there, well, you had a story forever. My old friend Jim was behind the bar, bartender, a great guy, a really gentle soul who I would never want to be on the wrong side of, the kind of person that you wanted in a bar if something went wrong, and when things were going right, perfect patter, a great barman, and a good man. It was pretty busy, and the 2 rooms, the back room had regular seating. The front room was mostly little round cafe tables. And I walked in, and there was one that was open, 3 tables from the door, plate glass door. And I sit down. I don't remember whether I ordered a beer or went up to the bar and got one from Jim, but I then go back to my seat, and I'm facing the door. And I hear some commotion at the bar, and I turn around, and I see there is a guy who is inebriated, who is starting to get loud. And Jimmy is doing his best to just keep him discreet, but he just gets louder and more obnoxious. And at a certain point, he is walked out of the bar. It's funny, I haven't told this story in a long time, and I'm just feeling what I felt again that night. He is weaving and bobbing. He's not there in the eyes. This man is drunk with a capital D. I see him look at me and other people through the plate glass door, and then walk around to the West Broadway side of the bar, which is all plate glass windows. And I look at him, and he's looking in, and he's in another place. And I start to get concerned, anxious. I have only had this happen to me once in my life, so I have nothing to compare it to what I'm about to describe to you. But I just kind of went into my thoughts, my imagination, I went someplace inside myself, and I just played this out in my mind. And what I saw in my mind was, after just regarding everybody in the bar through the window, he walked slowly back to the doorway that I'm facing, separated by 3 cafe tables. I'm at the 3rd. And he backs up, and he runs at the plate glass door and smashes through it. Of course, everything changes in a moment. He falls forward, bleeding, onto the back of the person whose back is to him at the first cafe table. That person falls into the table, and that table starts to go over onto the person behind it, who backs up into the person behind them, and their table starts to go over toward me. And as I see the table go over, in my imagination, my mind, my thoughts, I pick up my beer, I lift it as my table falls, and I'm back in the room thinking, what was that about? Now I'm feeling really tense. And everybody in the bar is again in another place. They've just had a look at Mick Jagger. And there's camaraderie and laughter and just excitement of a brush with fame. I'm not in a good place. I don't really like the way I'm feeling. This is very anxiety provoking. And I kind of get my bearings again. And there's this inebriated man standing at the plate glass window at the side of the bar, looking in and things. And I can't take my eyes off him now. And I watch as he slowly, again, reeling a bit, walks to the front of the building and looks in the plate glass window again, and then starts to walk back. And I think, no. I am now absolutely on the edge of my seat. And I watch him as he backs up. And that's how drunk he was. He ran through a plate glass door and falls on that first person. The table starts to go over. The next table starts to go over. Like a matador going like that with a bull, I stand up. I've seen this before. I lift my beer as my table goes to the floor. Pandemonium breaks loose in the bar. I right my table. Everybody is now in a fairly hysterical state, except for me. I'm fine. I'm calm as I can be. And the abiding thought that I remember feeling was, oh, that's what that was about. What the hell? What happened there? I, as an investigative writer dealing with the unusual, will always defer first to the most mundane, boring, everyday explanation possible. Look at it from as many angles as possible. If there's nothing that I can deduce from it, I will take one step up to the second most exotic. Well, there was no place to go here. I was able to, was it a coincidence? I guess that's possible. Not probable, but possible. Then again, last week, somebody won $2 billion in the lottery. I always remember stuff like that in terms of the odds. I think before it went to 2 billion, it was, you are more likely, 300 times more likely to get hit by lightning. Remember that next time you buy your next big lottery ticket. It's disheartening. Deja vu. Yes, very possibly. I was not into the subject of UFOs at this point, not at all. I had read some Edgar Cayce. I was fascinated by ancient mysteries, the possibility of reincarnation, some esoteric subjects. But this, to this day, I still don't really know what to make of it. And I'm okay with it. It was, for me, a reminder that the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. And at the same time, there's organization to it, or the forces that be have a sense of humor and occasionally like to keep us on our feet. In the world of coincidence, we've all had them. And I've had some doozies. Again, 40 odd years ago, I was aspiring to be a writer. And back then it was all print. And I had written up some memories from my trek, months of walking around India, and then tried to find a publication which would have it. And ultimately, it was actually a magazine that I have a copy of here, long defunct, called Ancient Astronauts. That's right. And they bought it. They paid me $100. I was now a professional writer and very excited about having passed through that door. So I'm now thinking, I need to come up with an idea for something else, for another article. At that time, I was, among other things, very interested in psychology. I was reading a fair amount of Carl Jung, Wilhelm Reich. But Jung at that moment had intrigued me with his notions of synchronicity, coincidence, and discussed it from a symbolic, from a scientific, from almost every point of view imaginable. And I thought, I've got a great idea for a story, for an article. I'm simply going to start a new journal, but just of coincidences, and see where it goes. And maybe, it will lead me to another paper. Well, I started and still have that journal up on the shelf. It began with what I would call a very low-level, first-tier coincidence. This all happened in New York City. I'd be walking along a street and thinking about somebody. As I walk by two people talking and you get a snippet, maybe a sentence and a half or half a sentence or something, somebody says the name of that person. Or I'm going to catch a subway and I step out onto the platform just as my train pulls in. Not a normal occurrence for New Yorkers, but again, nothing to write home about. Then as I started to pay more attention to them, there seemed to be more of them. I was very careful, as I always try to be, in being as scrupulously accurate as I can be. The first time that I was walking down a street thinking about somebody, and this was at a time where New York was kind of down in terms of budgeting for a lot of municipal things, including trash pickup. There was just a lot more garbage in the city and, papers floating around. Stepping on, I think, a front page of the Daily News or something as it was about to blow by me, and seeing the name that I was thinking about on the cover. Well, I'm now connected up with a magazine, also now long defunct, called ESP Magazine. Perfect. My editor, Howard Schmugler. I hope he is alive and well somewhere. A good guy, a good editor who lived in Rhode Island. And at the time, we communicated by U.S. mail, occasionally calling each other, because every call outside of your local call you paid for. And I had finally pulled it all together and had quite a grand coincidence that I thought would tie it all up. It was the right word count. And I told Howard that I was ready to send him the article. And he said, by chance, I will be in New York City next week to do some business. And while I'm in town, I have to drop off some stuff at a friend of my girlfriend's. And I don't know New York City. Maybe you can help me get there. And I said, well, why don't you come here for dinner? And so Howard came for dinner to my little loft in Chinatown. And we were talking about the article, and he liked the draft. And we finish eating. And he says, so when I leave here, before I head back to the station, I need to go to this address and drop these things off for this friend of my girlfriend. Do you know where this address is? I went, yes, it's on the next street. It's around the corner. Well, we had a great laugh about that. I mean, what are the odds of that in a city like New York or any big city? And he, again, didn't know the city at all, but he had the number of his girlfriend's friend and called her. And she was expecting him, of course, and said, I'm here at my friend Peter's, who says, I'm very close to you. Let me put him on the phone, and, he'll tell me what direction to take. Well, we start to chat, and my loft was set up. This is a rectangle, big windows in the front, 2 small windows on an alleyway in the back, courtyard, nothing fancy, just an industrial area, buildings facing me. My one telephone, cord telephone, was in the back of the loft, right by one of the windows. And I'm chatting rather absentmindedly with this woman and say, so exactly where are you? She says, well, I'm in the building right next to the Knickerbocker post office. And we have a laugh because that's my post office. And Howard and I, once again, exchange looks like, wow, this is a really good coincidence. Meanwhile, again, I'm staring out my back window at just these buildings across the way in the courtyard. And I see that there's one window on the 3rd floor, like me, with the shade pulled down, with a silhouette of a person who seems to be on the phone. Of course, that's ridiculous that it would be this person, but jokingly, I ask them if they are on the 3rd floor of their building. And she, a lovely woman named Marty, who I met shortly after, said, yes, why would you ask? I say, are you standing in the back of your loft? Yes, what is going on here? Starting to get agitated. I said, pull up your shade. And there she was, and there I was. And that's impossible. That's just ridiculous, except that's exactly what happened. We end up getting off the phone, and before I sent Howard on his way, I said, I'm going to write this up. This is going to be the new ending to the article. This is amazing. And I'll compensate, with the word count. He was really shaken up, so much so that after I submitted this absolutely true, untouched, over-the-top coincidence to him, he really surprised me by cutting it from the article. And I called him, and I was disappointed and a bit miffed about it. I said, why did you do that? He said, look, you know it's real. I know it's real. Nobody in the world is going to believe this. It's just beyond the odds. And so it was. At the same time, Marty and I started to spend time together, became romantically involved, had really quite a wonderful affair for several months. She, I knew, followed a very Buddhist path, but after some months decided that she was going to live in a ashram in upstate New York, and also take a pledge of celibacy, at least for the time being, to follow her path. I hope I had nothing to do with that decision. But again, your logical mind says, what are the odds? And your rational self says, hell if I know. A noteworthy coincidence at that level of the game, I also experienced on the road, and very briefly, I was somewhere in very rural Iran on the Great Salt Desert, coming back basically from India, part of the way that I had gone there. And my bus had stopped for 10 or 15 minutes. And in that time, another bus pulled in very briefly. A lot of folks who were on the bus got off, some just for a stretch, other ones back on. And 2 basically white guys like me in their early 20s, Americans, could tell immediately by their look, got off, and we started to chat. Their bus was only there for 5 minutes or so. Mine was there for a bit longer. And very quickly get into who are we and what are we doing and where are we coming from, where are we going. They are heading to India. I am on my way back, so didn't have too much time to share stories with them, but wish them good luck. And then the question came, where are you from? New York. New York? Where in New York? Now, up until that moment in my life, if anybody had said to me, oh, you're from New York, where in New York? Expecting that I was going to know somebody that they knew in New York, which for most people means the greater 5 boroughs of New York City, for some, New York State, which is big, would be slim. And when that first question came, I remember, why are we even going to go through this? But I said, New York City. New York City. Did you grow up there? No. I grew up in a more rural area. Where did you grow up? Well, on Long Island. Now they're looking at each other. Long Island, where on Long Island? Nassau County. Nassau County, where in Nassau County? I think it was about there that I remained civil, but I started to think, this is just silly. And I'm a little irritated that they're even pushing this because it's going nowhere. And, maybe they're just having a bit of a laugh at my expense. Said, okay, a small village called Rockville Center. Rockville Center? Yeah. What street? Come on. Harvard Avenue. Now I can see they are absolutely shocked, amazed, quite lit up, and say, what number Harvard Avenue? I, on the other extreme, are bored to the point of almost being pissed off. And I said, 216 Harvard Avenue. And they said, 216? You must know Murray Krugman. I said, yeah, it's only since he was about 5 years old. And what? Oh, he was our roommate at Boston University or college in Boston. Oh, the bus is leaving. Got to get going. Bye. Well, Murray Krugman, who I did know all through childhood, went on to become a very well-known and respected producer in the world of pop music. He was one of the original producers of the Blue Oyster Cult, great heavy metal band. And what was that about? What were the odds of that happening? It really rattled my cage, so to say, in a way that I still wonder. It's different than the event at the Broome Street Bar. It's different than what happened to me at my loft with Howard and Marty. But I know after all the years I've been working in paranormal and UFO-related research, some years ago, I absolutely came to the understanding, and very comfortable with it, that I knew finally how little I actually knew that I could take to court, that I could prove, that I could get beyond wondering about to a degree. And was that okay with me? Is it okay to not have the answers to these questions? Well, I think so, very much to a great degree. I will repeat part of a story that I told a month ago because it bears repeating in the same spirit. I was in Moscow. I had decided to see some of the Soviet Union before returning home after a year's traveling abroad. And it was very difficult, especially for a single individual to enter the Soviet Union if they were American. You had to be on a tour, carefully watched. But I literally showed up at the Soviet embassy one afternoon in Kabul, Afghanistan, and talked my way in. I paid in advance for my train from the Iranian border through farm country in the Soviet Union, 4 days or so to Moscow, several days there. A flight. I had only taken 2 flights in my life up until then, from Moscow to Leningrad. And it was at my hotel in Moscow that on the first night, having dinner, I observed 2 Chinese women, who I simply assumed were Chinese, in the dining room, seated further away, and just made a mental note. I thought they were both very attractive. The next morning at breakfast, they came in, and my first sense was these 2 have been out partying all night. They're sat at the next table, so I could see that their makeup was a little off, kind of circles under their eyes a bit, but chatting away. And I realized immediately these were not Chinese women. They were speaking a dialect of English that I associated with first-generation kids of Chinese immigrants in Chinatown. There's no question in my mind. And I couldn't stop myself, and just interrupted politely as I could at a certain point to ask them what they were doing in Moscow. One of them seemed rather miffed and would have been just as happy if I weren't there. The other one, glad to answer the question. They were both New York CCNY, City College of New York students, on a Russian language program for 6 weeks in the Soviet Union. And what was I doing there? And one gal, after they finished eating, headed back up to their room to get some rest. I, on the other hand, and Irene, took off for the day, and being that she had been there a month and a half, was kind enough to show me around the city to a degree. And we got quite close in a day, as we do sometimes in life. And by that evening, we're making out like teenagers in my hotel room, and decided we should get together when she returned to the States. I would be returning earlier. And so we did. And for that first year that I was back, we saw quite a lot of each other. So with that as backstory, one evening we were on the phone talking, and as people do when they're dating, questions can revolve around very complex subjects like, what are you doing? What are you wearing? Etc., and so forth. And being a scintillating conversationalist, I asked her what she was doing. And she, as she said later, thought she was going to stymie me on this and just stop me cold. She said, I'm sewing my obi. Now, unaware that I had some connections to Japanese culture and knew what an obi was. It is actually the large ceremonial cloth roll in the back of a formal kimono outfit. But I did have the presence of mind to say, knowing I'd never get to say it again in my life, what's a nice Chinese girl like you doing sewing an obi? And we had a bit of a laugh, and she said, you know what an obi is? I said, yes. I asked her what she was doing with obi and kimono. And she said, I study kabuki dancing. Uh-huh. I had a girlfriend who was the love of my life, who I was still very much in love with when I started to travel, who also studied kabuki. Christine was a professional dancer when she started out in life, studied with the Martha Graham School, went on to become a very accomplished painter, and got a graduate degree in it. And, I used to attend some of her lessons at the Nippon Club on West 57th Street. And like that situation in the Broome Street bar, I'm starting to get a little wired. And I ask Irene if she studies kabuki at the Nippon Club. And she says, yes. Why would you ask? I said, do you study with the ranking kabuki master in America, Madam Mayoko Watanabe? And that got her agitated. What is going on here? Why are you asking me these questions? How could you know that? Yes, I am studying with her. And I take a breath and I say, do you know a woman named Christine Gilmore? And she said, yes, she's my dance partner. What's going on here? So is this the Matrix? Is the man behind the curtain moving switches occasionally to entertain me or to keep me on my toes? Or is this just part of the fabric of the way life works? And I think it's the latter. I really do think that it is an example of that there is more to heaven and earth than we understand. I want to close this conversation with a story I've shared with a few people over the years that was a life-changing event for me in a good way. My sister Helen, who I was absolutely devoted to and extremely close, passed away in the year 2000 in January following complications from surgery. And it destroyed me. A year later, I was much better at seeming that I was improving, but still wrestling with a great deal of grief. And so it went. I was living in an apartment on West 88th Street. That was my dear friend Stan Schneer's apartment, still is. And he worked there during the day. He had turned it into a photo studio and slept there at night. But then his second wife and he got another place. He used the apartment as his home, as his workplace. And I stayed there. That was where I stayed at night. We'd occasionally run into each other, but mostly our schedules were passing in the night. And it worked out that he needed the apartment back. I'd been there about 2 years. And I believe it was his wife's daughter was accepted to a graduate program. And he told me I had to find a new place in 2 weeks. Well, he had given me a wonderful deal. It would be impossible to find it again. But I looked. And even though I was working a full-time job at the time, I looked at every listing I could on weekends. I walked around New York City with $500 cash in my pocket, ready to pay a superintendent or whomever to get me that lead that I needed to get that apartment. Everybody I knew was looking for me, or at least knew that I was looking. And the 2 weeks came and went with not even a bite. Stan was wonderful and made it clear that he absolutely understood and not to worry about it. But in 2 weeks hence, I had to be out. And we set the date for a Saturday. I doubled all my efforts, and it's now the second Thursday. I have 2 days before I have to move out, and I still don't have a lead. I'm staying late, as I often did at my job at Central Park Media on West 57th Street, just a hop and a skip from where I used to live. And I get a call from an old friend of Helen's, who asked me if I was still looking for a place. And I said, absolutely. And she told me there was a friend of hers, recently divorced, who had a 2-bedroom apartment, was a really nice gal, into the stuff that we were into, might even know who I was, had some interest in UFOs, and that it was a nice apartment. And if we could cut a deal, she'd probably make a good roommate. Well, I thanked her very much, and I called the number. And just as Helen's friend had said, this was a lovely person, a lot of fun to start with, was looking for a roommate, and I qualified in every possible way until we got to the price. I knew $1,000 was going to be my limit. Whatever it was, that was it. And it was $1,200. I explained to her that I thought that was a great deal for what one would be getting at that time and place in New York. But it wasn't me. But I thanked her very much, and I'm about to hang up. And she says, wait a minute. I coincidentally also have a friend who's recently divorced, who has a 2-bedroom apartment, who will be looking to rent a room, but hasn't even cleaned it out yet. Is not looking now. But seeing as you're desperate, you might want to give her a call, explain the situation, tell her I gave you the contact information, and go from there. And so I did. And this woman understood what I was saying, but wasn't interested. I prevailed on her at least to consider it. I'll sleep on the floor in sleeping bags, surrounded by your boxes for months. I have no problem. I just need to move fast. Well, I'm going to California next week. I'm actually leaving on Saturday. Do you like dogs? I need a dog sitter. I have one there, but you'd be with the dogs as well. I don't know. I don't know you. But she agreed to have coffee with me. And that evening, and I closed up, got her address, closed up the office, and started to walk toward the building. And as I'm walking, I'm thinking, why is this number so familiar to me? Why is this address resonating on such a high level? Until I woke up and I'm approaching the overhang. And it's a building where my sister Helen and I had shared an apartment 10 years earlier. I walk in the lobby. I tell the concierge who I'm here to see. He says, very good. And he gives me a apartment number on the 20th floor where we lived 10 years earlier. And I was in an altered state in the elevator going up. I really, I just kept mantraing every once in a while somebody wins a $100 million lottery and things like that, but this wasn't making sense to me. It was not our old apartment. It was the apartment exactly opposite. I ring the bell. She opens the door. And the very first word she says to me is, you? It was our old neighbor who had never moved. Second thing she said was, I heard about Helen, my condolences. And she invites me in and we sit down and we start to have some coffee. But we both keep losing it. She interrupted my conversation, I think 3 times early on, say, what just happened here? How did you, what? Well, she still wasn't ready to do it, but she knew me. And, we were apartment friends, knew as a person she could trust, etc. I told her I'd give her whatever she wanted as an advance. We went out to dinner the next night. We decided that night after dinner, she decided I could move in the next day when she took off to California. And that was my home for the next 2 years. All I can say as we wind up is I can't believe that happened as a random act of coincidence. My sister and I spent our lives watching out for each other in all respects. And I think she was simply there for me when I needed her. More to the point, the grief, the sadness, the heaviness, the weight I had been carrying around with me for several years dissipated in a matter of weeks and never came back. I still miss my sister, of course, but I no longer mourn her. If you enjoy this show, please consider subscribing to it. We'll be back next week. My guest will be returning, one of the great men in the world of UFO studies, Steve Bassett, our full-time lobbyist against UFO secrecy, director of Paradigm Research Group. Stay well, stand up for what you believe in, and be kind to each other. See you next week.